He sits alone, but not alone. The television blares sports scores. Laughter bounces from every corner. The room feels loud, but inside, he feels empty. You might think he's cold, maybe distant, maybe arrogant. But here's a truth few dare to say out loud. Male loneliness is different. It's cuter, harder to spot, and far more dangerous because of that silence. For many men, friendship isn't just rare, it's almost invisible. And today, we're going to unpack exactly why. If you've ever felt this strange isolation, even when surrounded by people, leave a quiet comment. I feel what they don't see. 1. Loneliness in men is often invisible. At first glance, he might look fine. He has a job, he's polite, he shows up to family events, he even laughs when someone tells a joke. But what few people realize is that loneliness in men rarely announces itself loudly. It hides in plain sight behind small talk, routine, and responsibilities. Most men don't advertise their isolation. Instead, they bury it quietly. For every man with a trusted confidant, a friend who knows his real struggles, there are countless more who have no one they can call at midnight when they can't sleep. No one who knows what's keeping them awake. This loneliness isn't because men don't want a connection. It's because somewhere along the way, society told them they shouldn't need it. They should be independent. They should be strong. They should figure it out on their own. But genuine friendship requires the opposite, a willingness to be vulnerable, to admit uncertainty, to confess weakness. So a man sits at the bar with other men, talking about sports, politics, work, and no one asks how he's feeling. No one knows, and no one notices. Loneliness in men is often invisible not because it isn't there, but because they've been trained to make sure you can't see it. 2. Masculinity as performance blocks intimacy. True friendship requires this simple act, lowering your guard, saying aloud, I'm struggling, I need help. But for most men, from a very young age, those words are forbidden. Boys are told not to cry, not to whine, not to show doubt. Be a man, they hear before they even know what that means. And so they start performing. They learn to show strength, even when they're falling apart inside. By the time they reach adulthood, this performance is seamless. Steady handshake, calm exterior, casual confidence. But underneath, a fear that showing any crack in that facade will make them look weak, unworthy, or less of a man. And here lies the tragedy. This very performance blocks what intimacy requires. You can't form a true connection while wearing armor. You can't build closeness while performing toughness. Men often sit together, side by side, watching a game, working on a project, but their conversations avoid depth. They stay in the safe lanes of facts, opinions, and hobbies. The armor keeps them looking masculine, but it also keeps them isolated. And over time, this isolation hardens into something worse, a belief that maybe they were never meant to be truly known in the first place. 3. Male friendship often stays at the surface. Look closely at how most men socialize, and you'll see a pattern: shared activities, shared jokes, shared knowledge, but rarely shared hearts. Men will talk for hours about their favorite sports teams, debate the merits of a vintage car engine, argue passionately over the stock market, and quote movies line for line. But ask them about their deepest fear, about the last time they felt broken? Silence. Their wounds stay hidden, not because they don't hurt, but because revealing them feels too risky. Their anxieties remain private, not because they aren't real, but because they've been taught that to speak them aloud is shameful. Their sadness is swallowed, buried beneath sarcasm or distraction. It's common to see two men who have known each other for decades, who have shared drinks, traveled together, maybe even served in the military side by side, and yet know almost nothing about each other's inner world. They might know each other's favorite whiskey, but not that one of them hasn't felt truly happy in years. They might know how the other likes his steak, but not that he's afraid to go home because it's too quiet now. Male friendship often stays at the surface because the waters beneath are too deep, and no one ever taught them how to swim there safely. 4. The cost of silence. Without spaces where men can admit weakness, something dangerous happens, even in the company of friends. Picture a group of men gathered at a backyard barbecue. Laughter fills the air, casual jokes fly around. But beneath that easy atmosphere, how many of them are quietly struggling? How many sit there thinking, I wish I could say what's really on my mind? Moments that could build true connection, a whispered confession of fear, a quiet request for help, are buried under small talk and distractions. And this isn't a one-time thing. It becomes a lifelong pattern. In their 20s, they stay silent because they want to seem confident. In their 30s, they stay silent because they're too busy to pause. In their 40s, they stay silent because no one seems to ask. By their 50s and 60s, silence has become their default setting. And yet, loneliness creeps in not when a man is alone, but when he realizes he can't speak freely, even around the people he calls friends. The cost of silence isn't just missed opportunities for connection, it's decades of emotional self-denial. A man can live surrounded by family, colleagues, old friends, and still feel utterly alone. Because connection isn't about proximity, it's about permission. And if no one has ever given him permission to speak his truth, his silence becomes a prison he quietly accepts. 5. Society rewards stoicism, not connection. From the earliest days of civilization, masculinity has been shaped around a single idea: stoicism. To be a man meant to endure, quietly, to bear humiliation without showing pain, to lead without faltering, even when afraid. Throughout history, this definition served a purpose: soldiers in battle, fathers in crisis, leaders in uncertainty. But today, it carries a quiet tragedy. It creates millions of men who feel they cannot ask for help. Millions who believe that to say, "I need you," is to admit failure. Even modern culture celebrates this image. Strong, silent type. Real men don't cry. Man up. I was real. So men learn early. Vulnerability is weakness. Softness is shame. They laugh outwardly while grieving inwardly. They offer advice while hiding their own struggles. They show up while feeling hollow inside. This model of masculinity offers applause to stoic men, but it costs them intimacy. It teaches them to bear suffering alone, while wishing for understanding. It trains them to suppress pain until even they can no longer find the words for it. And the irony is devastating. The very definition of being a strong man prevents many men from building the kind of close friendships that would help them stay whole. 6. Why men fear revealing their pain. Imagine this moment. A man sits across from a friend, someone he's known for years. His heart feels heavy, his mind restless. He wants to say it. "I feel lost. I haven't slept well in months. I'm afraid I'm failing at life." Isn't. But as the words rise to his lips, something stops him. What will he think of me if I say this? Will I seem weak? Will I lose his respect? So instead, he says nothing. He smiles politely, changes the subject, pours another drink. This fear of judgment, of being seen as less than, is why so many men lock their pain inside. And the tragedy is that this fear isn't unfounded. Too often, when men do show vulnerability, they are met with awkward silence, or worse, with minimization. "You'll be fine. Don't overthink it." That response teaches them to shut down faster next time. So rather than risk embarrassment, they keep their pain private. This creates a cruel cycle. The less men speak their struggles, the less others expect them to, and the less society hears men being vulnerable, the less acceptable it seems for any man to be vulnerable at all. Over time, many men convince themselves no one would understand anyway, so they bear their pain alone, all the while craving understanding. 7. The illusion of strength. It's one of the great ironies of masculinity. In art, in poetry, in film, we see men capable of incredible tenderness, of empathy that runs deep, of sacrifice born from love. Yet in everyday life, most men rarely extend this tenderness toward one another. Instead, they hide behind sarcasm, behind jokes that deflect, behind bravado that feels safe. They perform confidence, even when their hearts ache. Why? Because to drop that mask, even for a moment, feels dangerous. The illusion of strength, the polished exterior, the easy smile, the casual indifference becomes armor they're afraid to remove. They fear that to show softness is to risk judgment, that to reveal care is to appear weak. So men hold back empathy not because they lack it, but because they have learned to protect it, to guard it. This illusion of strength serves them socially, but robs them emotionally. It keeps them appearing strong while feeling profoundly alone. 8. The consequence. Isolation within relationships. Even in marriage, even in long-term partnerships, many men remain profoundly lonely. On the outside, they seem like the perfect husband, providing, protecting, leading, showing up. But emotionally, they remain distant, misunderstood, unseen. And often their partners don't even realize the depth of this loneliness. He smiles at dinner, he takes out the trash, he drives the kids to school, but he rarely says how tired he feels, how lost, how invisible. His silence isn't absence of feeling, it's absence of permission. He's been trained to think that vulnerability would burden his partner, that admitting his struggles would make him seem less capable. So he carries his fears quietly, lying awake next to someone he loves, feeling completely alone. This is the hidden cost. Even inside relationships, men can live in isolation, locked in a private world of unspoken doubt. 9. The generational cycle. This loneliness isn't just personal, it's generational. Fathers, who were once boys told to man up, pass those same lessons to their sons. Stop crying, be strong, don't show weakness. And so it repeats. One generation teaching the next that stoicism is strength and that vulnerability is shameful. A boy learns early that his father's approval comes easiest when he hides his feelings. He learns that tears mean failure, that softness invites rejection. This legacy of stoicism becomes a legacy of silence, a pattern handed down, silently, from father to son. And unless someone breaks this cycle, it will continue. A future filled with men who love deeply, care fiercely, and yet never say so aloud. Not because they don't feel, but because no one ever showed them how. 10. The way forward. Vulnerability as courage. The solution to male loneliness sounds simple, but it's anything but easy. It requires men to redefine what strength truly means, not as the ability to suppress emotions, not as keeping pain hidden behind a stoic face, not as the refusal to ask for help, but as the courage, real courage, to speak feelings aloud, to say, I'm afraid today, to admit, I feel lost right now. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's bravery. The kind of bravery many men were never taught, but need more than ever. This shift in mindset from performance to presence, from toughness to truth, is the key to breaking free from isolation. And it's not about grand declarations or therapy sessions in front of crowds. It's about small, honest moments between men when one says what he truly feels and the other listens without judgment. That's the way forward, redefining masculinity itself, so that being vulnerable is finally seen as what it always was, an act of strength. 11. Tools for connection. Connection doesn't happen by accident. It needs tools, simple tools that help men bypass the scripts they were taught. Imagine this: a quiet evening, two men sitting together, and between them, a small stack of cards. On each card, a question. When did you last cry? What's your greatest fear right now? What memory still haunts you? At first glance, it might feel silly, uncomfortable even, but beneath that awkwardness is an opportunity to speak and to listen in ways many men never have. These tools aren't magic, they're invitations. Invitations to step outside old patterns, to set down the armor for just a moment. And the relief that comes from answering even one question honestly can change everything. Because what men are truly longing for isn't just answers. They're longing for spaces where they don't have to pretend anymore. 12. Male friendships that nourish. A real friend, a true friend, does something rare. He helps you feel less crazy. He doesn't fix you, doesn't lecture you, doesn't compete with you. He simply sits beside you, especially when life feels darkest. A true friend argues against your despair when you can't wand. He reminds you of your worth when you forget. He keeps you company in silence, without needing to fill it with noise. And men deserve friendships like this. Men need friendships like this. But here's the quiet tragedy. Most men don't know how to create them. They were never shown what nourishing friendship looks like. So they settle for surface-level bonds, drinking buddies, sports talk, casual acquaintances, but no real depth. That needs to change. Because male friendships that nourish don't just improve life. In some cases, they save it. 13. Breaking the illusion. The hardest step a man can take is not climbing a mountain. It's sitting still and saying out loud, I am lonely. Not with shame, not with bitterness, but with quiet honesty. This simple confession is rare precisely because the illusion of strength has been so deeply ingrained. For decades, he's been taught that loneliness is failure, that admitting it would make him seem needy, broken, weak. But here's the truth. This sentence, "I am lonely," is not a surrender. It's a breakthrough. It cracks the armor he's carried too long. It opens the door to real friendship, the kind built not on performance, but on truth. Breaking the illusion doesn't require grand speeches. It requires a single moment of courage, a willingness to name what's real even when the world says men shouldn't. 14. Building spaces where men can be real. The future must include spaces where men can finally stop performing. Not loud, busy places, but quiet, intentional ones. A small club, a group around a fire pit, a table in the corner of a cafe. Places where it's safe to speak, where men can tell the truth. I'm tired. I'm afraid. I don't have it all together. Spaces where a man's tears aren't mocked, but honored. Where he can feel, without ridicule. These spaces are rare now, but they are essential, because without them, most men will keep wearing their masks. They'll keep showing up polished, but hollow. Creating these spaces isn't just an act of kindness. It's an act of necessity for the health, sanity, and wholeness of men everywhere. 15. The cost of not acting. If we don't address male loneliness, the consequences will not always be obvious, but they will be devastating. Depression, addiction, isolation, the slow erosion of mental health behind a stoic mask. This is the quiet epidemic no one talks about. A generation of men who seem fine, but are quietly unraveling inside, who laugh on the outside, while carrying invisible burdens, who achieve success, but feel empty. The cost of not acting is paid in lost lives, in silent suffering, in decades of disconnection, and the tragedy is, it's preventable. It starts with understanding, it grows with compassion, and it heals with action. Male loneliness is real, but it doesn't have to stay hidden, not anymore. So if you see a man who seems withdrawn, who keeps to himself, who speaks less and listens too politely, don't assume he's cold. Don't assume he's arrogant. He may simply be lonely in a way you can't see. If you've felt this yourself or know someone who has, leave a quiet comment below. I see it now. Because understanding this truth could save not just a life, but a legacy.